Well, it's a delight to be back in Oxford with you, and of course we've been colleagues for several decades around communication and the internet and such, and I'm delighted to see this new reader coming out on society and the internet that you are one of the editors for. Can you tell us how this came about?
Well, when we started doing research on the internet and the social impacts of computing and telecommunications, the internet was so new, and everyone thought this is exciting, and we want to understand the social consequences. We're worried that today too many students think that the internet is just a part of their lives and there's no particularly special thing going on. It's just what we do. And we wanted to show students that actually the internet is constantly changing, that it's always new, and that it actually has a major implications for their lives. What information they get access to, what people they know, what services they get. And so we want students to challenge conventional wisdom about the internet, such as the taken for grantedness of it, and to also see that there are ways in which empirical research and social sciences can illuminate the actual consequences of the internet, and in ways that are very, very different often from what people think the internet does.
Well, and similarly, as you say, decisions that are being made in London and in Beijing and Washington are having profound influence on what the internet really is. It's the economics, it's the politics. Which parts of it did you find easiest and which most difficult to explain to an undergraduate audience?
Well, I think that that's an excellent point, because I think understanding the internet is a challenge for multidisciplinary perspectives. So you can't look at it just from a social science perspective or just from a sociological perspective, or even computer sciences. Any of the sciences has a blinkered view of what is going on in the internet. And I think with respect to the international decisions now being made, in my view, early on in the internet's history, we all focused on the technology and the rapid developments of new technical advances, such as the web and search engines and social media and so forth. And I think right now, over the next 5 to 10 years, I think attention is going to shift away and not so exclusively focus on technology and focus more and more on policy issues. Policy and regulation with respect to the internet. Major issues around surveillance, over censorship of the internet, over ownership, over liability, over I think these policy decisions that are now in play are going to have more influence on the future of the internet than some of the technical developments, and they may actually constrain and undermine technical developments in the near future. But it's very difficult for academics and students to accept a very multidisciplinary perspective, because it is harder, it's more complex to say you need a political scientist, a sociologist, a computer scientist to understand, say, the impact of electronic voting or the how censorship is done and with what effect on our lives and what are the legal issues involved.
And how are you addressing these as multinational issues? Because again, getting undergraduates even to realize that things that happen on distant shores may have profound influences on their day-to-day lives.
That's true. I think that's a really challenging aspect of the book, but we try to be as international as we can. So we have each chapter shows that students that, and when you can't just talk about the impact of the internet in a generic way, because actually the implications of the internet vary with context, so that we try to show through different chapters that you can study the internet in the household, or in shopping, or in social movements and protests, or in government and how organizations and governments do what they do. but also that it varies cross-nationally, given the cultural differences cross-nationally and the way in which law and policy is different cross-nationally. And I think I hope we surprise some students, because I think students think that, for example, the United States is in the lead in the internet. And it's very clear from the data we've looked at and some of that reported in the book that, I mean, China and some of the emerging nations are far outpacing North America and Western Europe in terms of the way they are using the internet for content creation, for e-commerce. And I think some of the real innovations that are coming about online are going to be increasingly coming from the developing and emerging nations on the internet. This next 2 billion users are going to be the ones who are innovating, and not necessarily Silicon Valley and North America.
Well, similarly, some developments are very fast, and they feel fast if you haven't been following them, and some are actually very slow. You've been talking about the Internet of Things for at least 10 years now that I can recall, and it's only recently on the front pages. Could you tell us maybe a bit more about how that's manifesting even in today's news?
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, because I mean the internet, of course, 1960s, early 70s was under development with ARPANET, and it wasn't until the 2000s that the public began to recognize the internet for what we talk about today, and it continues to change. I think likewise the Internet of Things has long been under development. The Internet of Things, of course, is the idea that right now we have billions of people online, but even if everyone on the planet were online, that would only be, some billions of people. But once you start putting things online, sensors, actuators, RFID tags, telephones, apparel, everything's going to be, potentially everything could be networked online. Then you're potentially talking about maybe 1 trillion things being on the internet. And it's a whole scale that is incredibly different from the internet as we know it today. And it creates the potential of, I think what happened is that it's been talked about by technical people for some time, and computer sciences, engineering, people developing the best antenna for capturing signals from mobile signals and so forth. But I think it's only now that social science, and I've been one of the social scientists trying to say, actually, we should look at the social implications of the Internet of Things and how some of these social issues should be shaping the way in which we regulate and so forth the Internet of Things. But this is a fascinating development. I know that right now everybody's riveted on the Malaysian Airlines that went missing, Flight 370. And again, that was picked up by a couple of signals sent by the plane. They've been able to feel that they can track where it may have crashed, and it's an extremely sad story. But it was that's sort of using homing devices and so forth. Even with a few signals, they were able to locate the likely crash site. And that's an illustration of how important not just putting people online, but actually putting things online are going to become to what we know about what is happening in our world.
But it's also pointing out the difficulty of infrastructure. I didn't realize until this morning's paper that those satellites are 1990s technologies that don't have GPS in them. And that's part of why it's been so hard. And people assume that everything is up to date.
Yeah, that's
and yet we've got this very uneven kind of investment.
Yeah. Well, the whole part of the Internet of Things is that it's sensors are not new, and RFID tags, but they are usually not online, or they're not on the internet. And part of the Internet of Things is that if you have standards and open networks that allow these devices to be connected on the internet, then all of a sudden it changes dramatically.
And we're back to the linked data where we started.
Yes, exactly.
Precisely because the different manufacturers control theirs, the book publishers control theirs, the shoemakers control theirs, and they have very few incentives to make them all work together.
Yeah, well, it's a big policy issue, yes, as you say, and I think, again, policy and governance issues will be as important as these technical developments, and whether the Internet of Things is as important as it could be. But again, I mean, we could be creating a very Orwellian society with the Internet of Things unless we are careful in terms of what people do with the Internet of Things. And the ideal is that you have a world in which you walk in the door and things happen that you want to happen because someone knows you're there and what you want. And so it's a very positive expectation and anticipated consequences, but things could go wrong and we could be creating a surveillance society instead of a convenient society.
And it's a pleasure to be back in Oxford and to work with you yet again on Voices from Oxford.
Thank you, Christine.